Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a watercolor and ink experiment. And I'm going to jump right into it and explain the materials and what the concept is. So we have a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Aqua, 11 by 15, 11 by 14, give or take. 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. I'm going to thoroughly coat this with water. And then from there, I'm going to take black India ink. In this case, I have a bottle of Dr. P.H. Martin's black India ink. You can use Higgins makes one that's readily available. I haven't tried that. And Speedball makes a few different sizes, and they have a large bottle that you can get for a very cheap price. So if you're interested in adding India ink to your art supplies, you have quite a few different options. Now, with this, yesterday I took the India ink and I dropped it around the edges of the painting. I then dried it off and then went my wet and wet watercolor on top of that. In this case, I'm going to drop it in. I'm going to grab a hake brush, a different one. Let's see. So I can spread it around. I'm going to try to get smoother lines from it. When we did the drops, it spread out and you could see the spaces where it didn't hit. That being said, it also wouldn't lift completely. So prior to that, I'm going to pull out some areas with the paper towel of water, and we'll see how it interacts with this area, and if we can preserve the white there by simply lifting that out. Okay, grab my ink. I'm going to put some drops in, and then I'm going to spread it with the hake. Now, this alone is very inspiring towards just playing around with abstract landscapes. If you really wanted to have fun, just the beauty of this spread gives a lot of potential. But in this experiment, we're spreading it out to get relatively uniform around the border. And then from there, I'll decide if I want to kind of put in a little bit of the landscape. Now, the ultimate goal, the purpose of this experiment is just to see how dark of dark we can achieve. And what I saw was that it's darker than I could normally achieve with fast and loose watercolor painting. At this point, I don't know if it's considered line and wash because we're using ink, but we're not really drawing a line. Also, let me soften that. You can see how inspiring it could be with the different shapes that form. Yeah, so I'm not sure if it'd be line and wash, mixed media, or just considered both. Just putting a little bit of idea. I'm tempted to even paint more of the scene. I have played with Chinese ink, which is essentially an India ink. I think some of them have shellacs and some of them do not. Some of them might have acrylics, some of them do not. So you kind of just want to look at them a bit. But there are a few different brands and different compositions. For the most part, you obviously don't want to use them in fountain pens, and anything you do use with them, you want to wash completely so that it doesn't permanently dry on it. I'll throw some more ink up here. Another thought that I had was doing 2 layers of India ink. seeing how much we could really build up that dark, because this will have a drying shift take place as the water lifts out of it. There are probably some inks on the market that are matte, and that probably adds to the darkness as well, not having that glossy effect. Let's see. I think at this point, pull out a little cloud shapes. We could even go a little bit further, pull a little bit of shapes out of here. When I had done this yesterday, I felt constricted at first. And what I mean by that was, for this framing device that I created now gave me about an 8x10 surface, let's say, to paint on. And I was painting in there, and then I realized I need to incorporate these outside edges. So even though they're entirely dark, now we'll see if we could pull back, and then we'll paint over it with watercolor whenever it dries. Add some textures here. This is going to be water. This will be a landmass. Thinking a tree here. Let's go to town and paint with this ink. Grabbed a little bit on the #1 rigger. Bring a tree here. And we'll have closer trees here. So proceed back, maybe a little bit of trees here. Okay, I got 2 jars of water, so I'm going to wash off the 2 brushes, and then later on, after the video, I'll wash them better. So I'm going to pause this. I'm going to dry it off. Pay attention to the shift that takes place as it dries, and then we'll play around with watercolor on top. All right, so we're pretty dried off. You could see that it lightened up as it dried. It is a little splotchy in areas, and that's something for us to watch out for as we paint and continue with this experiment, if we continue down the line with it some more. That being said, if the splotchiness does show through at the end, I'm thinking that a second coat of ink would work and probably handle that. If you look up in here, we can see how darker it is and not as spotchy, and that's where I put some more drops that second time. I think I just dropped some water on there. Anyway, and here we did not. Okay, so contrary to, well, not contrary, but oddly enough, now that we have it dry, I'm going to re-wet it. So this is going to be waterproof now. We found that it doesn't really affect or get affected by watercolor on top. So I'm going to do my normal wet and wet painting on top. Having just dried off the paper, I do find that it absorbs differently. It might be the temperature change in it. It might be now that it has the ink there as well. That could probably affect that. But I do find we need to put more than normal in regards to water. And I am standing up doing this, and Percy, the cat, is on my chair. I don't know if she's going to move. All right. So, Percy, you're going to have to move. You can sit right here. Let's grab some light red oxide, and we'll go for that bright, brilliant sunset. Get some reflections on the water. It's a lot. It's a light red oxide. Have some lemon yellow. Let it carry over on top of the ink. Let's see. Yellow ochre has played very well with this. And it surprises me how the watercolor sits on top of the ink on the sides. How well that shows up in the video, I'm not quite sure, but it does start to sit there. Okay, let's grab some ultramarine blue, mix it with that, and we'll work our way up into a Payne's gray. You can see the myriad of colors that are on the brush. All right, so we gradiated upwards. Let's darken our corners, and that way we have the dark on there. And that yellow. I really don't wash the hake brush off during the painting, so that always throws me off a little bit. We'll wash it, grab some pure ultramarine. And then Payne's gray. All right. So in this scene, I'm going to have a tree coming up back here, a closer grouping of trees in this region. A few notes on the hake brush. It is a Ranson hake brush, and it has been used for about 3 years now, so it's has quite a few miles on it. So if you pick up a brand new brush, it won't act the same way, but that's just part of learning your materials and, you know, breaking them in. Let's create a landscape right here, background, distant. This one's going to come here. It's a little bit of an S-shaped composition right there. We're using the #1 rigger. Just grabbing Payne's gray, burnt umber, ultramarine. Just putting dark pigments in. Create that edge. And we're wet and wet. Oh, I don't like that. Let's see if we can go back in to light red oxide. There we go. Normally I wouldn't do a correction like that, but it worked that time. Grab some raw umber. Start to build up this closer foliage. Let that dark area, the dark border that we created, be a part of the scene. We can paint over it, burnt umber. And in a few, raw umber, Payne's gray. I'm just trying to build up my dark, a little bit of variety in here. I think I lost a thought there for a moment. I apologize. But let that border be a part of the composition. Take the card. Now we won't be able to scrape back to white unless there was white there. But it's mostly the splotchy ink in that spot. Okay. Let's do a dry off and see how everything starts to soften. This light was causing a little bit of glare right there. Sorry about that. Okay, so we did our wet and wet ink. We then did our wet and wet watercolor. Now it's time to paint over that. Grabbing the number 4 rigger so I have more pigment on there. I find that it helps me paint faster. Unfortunately, the line isn't as thin as I'd want it to be, so I'll probably grab the number 1 in a few. But just going to start shaping these trees. Find with the different tools, it's all about convenience and what works for you. I pretty much minimize the brushes down to the hake, the number 1 rigger and the number 4 rigger, and it has the variety and everything that I need. You don't have to minimize it to those. You could obviously use whatever you would like. I know a lot of people in the fast and loose community are exploring foliage brushes, which I think are essentially kind of chopped up texture brushes. I have to look into those. I'm gonna grab some raw sienna. Fan brushes are very common. The script dagger brush is very fun. Squirrel mop. There's a large variety. You know, play with them and see what you like. Everybody always advises, using a minimum amount of pigments and tools, and I completely agree with that. But let's face it, you're going to buy more art supplies. You're probably going to at some point probably try 2 different brands of the same color. It's just the nature of art and art supplies. Actually, that's a good segue. You are always welcome to follow along with any one of these tutorials, and you have my express permission to sign anything that you do with your name and sell it, whatever you follow along with. I want you guys to be successful and be able to afford art supplies. You know that they get expensive. That being said, if you want to support this channel, you could simply like and subscribe, comment, let me know what you'd like to see. If you'd like to support financially, I have the Patreon down below. I also have different ways you can donate. Or if you'd like to own a piece of my art, I have the Etsy account. And if there's anything that I paint that isn't on there, and if I still have it, you can just let me know, and I'll let you know. I think everything's priced reasonably. Price to move, be hung in people's houses. I think I want to bring in foliage on this side and do a little bit of light red oxide and ultramarine for a distant purple. Kind of late in the game for it, but I'll put that back in here. This is actually based off of a composition I sketched last night. It was an imaginary composition, but I'm sure it exists somewhere. I've been playing with different mediums, and I picked up silver point, which is silver metal, or copper or things like that, on a slightly abrasive surface. It sounds expensive, but it isn't. I'll have to make a video on it. Run some Payne's Gray, get some Payne's Gray trees back in here. Get a lighter wash. Whenever you start doing mountains like this, just be careful of where you previously painted the mountain, that edge, if it's still wet, because you might get a bleeding effect that you don't like. There we go. I do want to bring a little bit of land here. And go with the hake for foliage. This is Payne's Gray, but I've been really liking the way the earth tones are working over the India ink in these experiments. The Payne's Gray is going to wind up drying and kind of blending in a little too much from the previous experiment. That's what I saw. So we'll see if that happens again. And speaking of Payne's Gray, it hasn't come in yet, but I ordered some different grays, like Dave's Gray and neutral tint. I guess neutral tint would be gray. We'll see. First to experiment with and see if it's something you would like to add to your palette. If there's ever any type of art supply or anything you'd like me to incorporate and experiment with, or color palette, let me know. If I have it or if I can afford it, I'll do it. Somebody recently had suggested indigo and sepia as a palette, and that was just absolutely amazing. Just feeding in. We're still wet in here. I'll grab some raw sienna. Yeah. That'll dry a little bit lighter, but it should stand out the way it is now. That's another thing, being aware of how your pigments will dry. Mixing white gouache would probably help get things stand out if you want to do that. I think we're gonna refrain from that. Let's do the side of a brush. I just wiped it off with my hand. You get to the point where you start having all the brushes in your hand, and well, I do have a paper towel too. I just use my fingers to clean it. Let's do a dry off and see where we are at. So not counting pauses for the blow dryer, we are 25 minutes in. We got a lot done with this experiment. Put a little bit of birds in. Now it would just be a matter of really playing with composition and detail. You know, as you can see, the raw sienna dried and lightened, but we can still see some of it, and it does sit forward. The splotchiness does show through here, so that's something to watch out for. Obviously right here it shows through, but we have a lot to work with experiment wise, and if you choose to pursue watercolor over ink, hopefully that inspires you and gives you ideas. And of course, if you ever follow along, I would love to see the result. You know, I have different social media that you can tag me in or send it to me. Even if you don't follow along with something and you want to show me something, feel free to send it or tag me. I'd love to see it. I hope you enjoyed, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a great day. Bye.